Following the investigation of the terrible mass murder at Katyn, a new atrocity by the Jewish GPU henchmen has now been uncovered near the Ukrainian town of Vinnitsa. Thousands of Ukrainian workers and peasants fell victim to the Bolshevik blood terror here. Here, too, the population provided the investigating authorities with valuable information to solve this new atrocious act of murder. Numerous bodies have already been identified on the basis of letters, papers, and everyday objects. The remains of the murdered Ukrainians were solemnly buried in a common grave. Alongside Katyn, Vinnitsa is a new stigma of Jewish Bolshevik murderousness and blood guilt.
The tragedy, the murders, or the corpses that you just witnessed, and the people gathering around the common graves, was the name given by for Stalin's repressions of Ukrainian Vinnitsa region, a place I'm from. The repressions took place in 1937-38, the period in the Soviet Union, which is also known as a time of Great Terror. The wave of mass terror in the Soviet Union and its Ukrainian Republic in particular was carried out by the Special Soviet Institution of Murder called NKVD, or People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, on the orders of Stalin. A large part of its apparatus was headed by Jews, who in the wake of the horrific pogroms during the Russian Civil War and subsequent victory of Bolsheviks became very loyal to the Soviet regime. According to the figures, which became known after the collapse of the Soviet Union, during the first 7 months of 1938, NKVD arrested 97,972 people in Ukraine alone. Among these so-called enemies of the people, there were 2,994 Trotskyites and right-wing deviationists, as they were called by NKVD, 700 participants of the so-called military fascist conspiracy, whatever it was, 454 Mensheviks, 109 Bundists, 1,991 social revolutionaries, 96 anarchists, and 1,512 Zionists, for a total of 7,856 people, vast majority of whom were Jews, that is, arrested. A fifth of this number, that is, a fifth of 97,000, or something like 20,000, were arrested in the Vinnitsa region and in the city of Vinnitsa. More than half of them were executed. According to common practice, relatives of those executed were told that their arrested relatives were shipped to remote regions of the USSR without the right to correspond. With the beginning of German war against the Soviet Union in 1941, and the occupation of Vinnitsa by the Nazis, there were appeals from German-appointed city administration to investigate the sites of presumed mass shootings. Initially, they were unanswered by Germans, as they were in process themselves of murdering Jews of Vinnitsa. A total of 31,000 Jews in Vinnitsa were slaughtered by Germans and their Ukrainian collaborators out of the total population of a bit more than 33,000 Jews. Among the 2,000 lucky ones who were evacuated before Germans came into the city were my mother, my aunt, my cousin. My grandmother was murdered along with 2 of my uncles. Only 76 Jews out of 33,000 remained in Vinnitsa when Germans came there were able to survive. However, in May of 1943, with the war turning against, so Germans did not want to do anything investigation before 1943, but in May 1943, with the war turning against them after their loss under Stalingrad, Germans initiated large-scale excavations in order to add to their anti-Soviet propaganda. The video that you saw was a part of their documentary that they created. We translated it and dubbed it in English. The collected by Germans documents were actively used in post-war period by representatives of the Ukrainian immigration to draw attention to the topic of mass crime. In September of 1959, the U.S. Congress held special hearings dedicated to the Vinnitsa tragedy. There are many questions which remain regarding the Vinnitsa tragedy, which remain to be answered, and the role played, and which is continues to play this tragedy in the memory and political culture of today's Ukraine. To help us understand and answer these questions, we invited our friend John Paul Himka, an American-Canadian historian, a retired professor of history at University of Alberta in Edmonton. John Paul is Ukrainian on his father's side and Italian on his mother's side. He is the author of many books related to our subject, including Ukrainian Nationalists and the Holocaust. The participation of two most important Ukrainian groups, military groups, in destruction of Ukrainian Jewry, 1941-1944. Jean Paul, welcome once again to Chicago Jewish Cafe.
Thank you.
What did you think about this little video and the introduction?
I've never seen the video before, but it's absolutely in keeping with other German propaganda I've seen on other sites, like the 1941 NKVD murders in Western Ukraine. It's absolutely in keeping with the German textual propaganda newspapers, which were then the primary source of information. These kind of newsreels, like you showed, were also a very important kind of. People went to the movies as often as they could in those days, and particularly they would be shown a newsreel first. I remember even as a child when we would go to the theaters in America, there would first be a newsreel and then the film. Yeah. So
there was no YouTube.
No, there was no YouTube. There was no texting. There was none of that stuff. It's kind of shocking for me to see that film, which I've never seen before. And as to your comments, it's absolutely true that that the Germans and their Ukrainian collaborators totally misrepresented who was buried in Vinnitsa in those mass graves. And that was that they would isolate Ukrainians as the victims, although, in addition, there were very many Poles. Because the Great Terror of 1937 to 38, per capita, the largest nationality that suffered was the Polish nationality. There was almost of genocidal proportions in the Soviet Union what happened to the Poles. And of course, Jews. There were Jews, yes, in the NKVD, as you point out, as a result of the pogroms of 1919 in particular. But there was also this, Tzvi Gittleman, a Jewish historian, one of my professors back in the day, he points out that, it's very often the case that particular police formations tend to have one or another ethnic group, like the Irish policemen in America for a long time were dominant. For a long time, Polish bishops were dominant. Sometimes some professions get occupied. And of course, those Jews who entered because of what they had seen during the pogroms could also bring in other people. It became a place to work, but it was a terrible place to work because it was involved in murder, arrest, torture, and that stuff. But there were also many Jews who fell on the other side, as you point out. Zionists were persecuted, Bundists were persecuted. And, a lot of the people who ended up in those mass graves were there because somebody wanted their apartment. They would write, this has been shown again and again, that Soviet citizens, out of pure envy, lack of morality, the same thing that would have come out during World War II, donose, these denunciations. They would denunciate somebody anonymously to the NKVD. That person would be brought in for questioning. The NKVD did not say, "Oh, you're innocent, let's go." No, they imprisoned those people for the most part and murdered them. So Jews who just happened to have, got on the wrong side of somebody else. In other words, it probably represents more or less the ethnic composition of the area. It was a wide net that was used. People could go in there for being stamp collectors into the mass graves. They could go into, and there were many Jewish stamp collectors. It just.
Well, they should not be. They should not have been helping, Japanese fascists to do all those things. Now, if they did not know Japanese, it was their problem. But that is not the point. We all know. I mean, the 1930s in the Soviet Union were the decade of absolute unrestrained murder, across the board. I mean, the number of millions of dead as a result of the policies of socialism, of collectivization, of repression, of Stalin trying to get the power within the Communist Party firmly under his control, But in Vinnitsa, you mentioned, Poles. This is an interesting thing. One of the biggest, you mentioned them, this KGB building where I had also an opportunity to be talked to for many, 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 many hours without sleep and without food and without anything by people. And the wall there as you come in there, and right after the wall, before the war, there was this Polish cemetery. So when you were talking about those Poles, they were shot right there under the wall and thrown right there over the wall into the Polish cemetery. I mean, and it's today there's a big monument to all those Polish people that were murdered in Central Park in Vinnitsa. But and there was a big monument to Christians that were murdered in those years in 37, 38. But there's no Jews. None. And when you talk to people that hold in their hands the huge collection of documents in Vinnitsa about it, and you tell them, why don't you open it? Let's see if there are Jews there. Well, we'll take, yes, we need to look into it. We need to, and then you ask them, and why do you need to look into it? You see, in this video, the last few words were Jewish Bolsheviks. Now, before the war, before Russian aggression against Ukraine, now, situation and the attitude toward this thing there was different. And for me, as you are part Ukrainian, for me, it is this aspect that is important. I mean, interesting. I understand that Ukrainians do not want to forget about horrible years that they lived through, those that did live through in 1930s. But this name, Vinnitsa's Tragedy, who gave this mass murder, or I don't even know what to call it, What is it? It's not mass murder, it's murder of massive number of people, you know. Who gave the name Vinnitsa Tragedy to this thing?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Because I don't know either, I mean, now we know that this is Vinnitsa Tragedy. I think in congressional hearings, the term or the phrase was used. But was it whether it was Germans who gave this thing? Because when I look at Vinnitsa Tragedy, not far away from this garden, which was the main common grave for victims of NKVD, that is KGB of that time. Not far away, it's city cemetery. There's a Christian segment of cemetery. There's Jewish segment of cemetery. There's communist, that are buried. But right on the other side, there's 5 huge graves that contain, by some estimates, 23,000, by some estimates, 25,000 of Jewish corpses. And 10 days, by the way, in Vinnitsa, when I look at the Babi Yar in Kiev, 10 days before the murder of Jews in Babi Yar, which was, like 33,000 or 35,000 Jews.
33,000 is the official number.
Yeah.
It's a bit more.
In Vinnitsa, 10 days before that, 10,000 Jews were taken to the soccer stadium in the Central Park, and that same Central Park, right next to which is Polish Cemetery, and shot and thrown on in those graves on Maximovich. So when I first heard Vinnitsa Tragedy, I thought that they were talking about the murder of almost all Jews of Vinnitsa. As I said, my mother was lucky to evacuate, before Germans came, so I was born. Otherwise, I would not be born. And some people were writing to me in 1988 when I was allowed for the first time to return to Ukraine, talking about it. One guy, professor, I forgot his name, he thought that this was all lies, that there was nothing like this. There was no shooting, by Soviets. There's that this is just propaganda against Soviet Union. So for me, it was.
You can find that, by the way, in RIA Novosti, that this was just a fake. That in fact this was the Germans killing.
Today, right now,
Yes, June 2023, RIA Novosti published that, and they said that just like the Germans and the Ukrainian nationalists faked this Vinnitsa thing, so they have faked Bucha. That of course the Russians.
So they connected.
Yes, they connect the two and say both are fakes.
You see, they're dumb, and maybe
that's your fellows your person you spoke with has that point of view.
Yes, in 1988. This is what they wanted, you know. This this is amazing. And so just like Bucha is a fake, so is Vinnitsa's murder is a fake.
Yes.
So they'll be disappointed when they watch this thing that neither Vinnitsa's murders of those tens of thousands of people there, no Bucha by Russian troops is a fake. It's the fact. And this is what Russia did now. I mean, it's not, look at this. Stalin did it then, you know, and right now in Russia, many people cover Stalin's criminality and the entire Soviet criminality. I mean, this is amazing. But let's get back to the attitude by Ukrainians toward the Vinnitsa's tragedy. I mean, my sense is that this should be corrected. I did not do a thorough research, but I found just very easily, the names of 26 Jews that were murdered in those graves. Germans found none. I found very simply 26. Now, I'm sure that I can find thousands more because
Well, yes, something like 650 or so people were identified by name.
out of
And,
9,500, right?
And you're looking at probably at least 9,500,
Right.
but probably well over 10,000 if all the exhumations were finished. So yeah, of course, you could just take even that proportion. If you say you found 26 just from names in 654, you have to remember that there'd be a lot of people who were already dead, who could not Jews who were already dead, who could not recognize their relatives, and
No
would
Jews,
certainly
no
not have
Jews,
appeared
no
in
Jews were abroad.
1943.
No Jews were abroad to recognize their relatives. They all were dead.
Yes. So therefore, 26 out of 450
650.
650 is, it seems small, but when you consider
No,
they could only identify them by name if they had a passport.
this is what I found in the documents. There was, but I did not look through the entire because there's really no possibility of looking through. I mean, maybe somehow. But what I'm thinking about is this: if in 1932-33, during Holodomor, the vast majority of victims were ethnic Ukrainians, peasants. In 1937-38, it was Communist Party purges. Now, within the Communist Party, Jews at that time constituted a big percentage, maybe 18%, maybe more. And what happened is that I looked in 1939, the number of Jews in the Communist Party is only 3.6% of the total.
Yeah, there was clearly an anti-Jewish purge.
It was, well, I do not say it's anti-Jewish. It was,
But it was.
against,
I don't think there's any doubt about that. No.
against the previous Communist Party members who had different ideas of what Soviet Union should be, ideas that did not jive with the idea of Comrade Stalin. So he killed them all. And there were many people, that were actively supporting. If you did not actively support Comrade Stalin, you're dead. And this is what happened. I mean, like the chief of NKVD, Yagoda, before Yezhov, before 1937, was Jewish. And there's across the board, the Jews were actively. Look at this. The starting point for participation of Jews on the side of the Bolsheviks, on the side of communists, was February 15th, 1919. I mean, we're talking about now Hamas killing 1,200 Jews, when they crossed the border. But what did the unit of Petlura's army did on February 15th, 1919? 1,800 Jews that were celebrating also Shabbat, like these Jews, were murdered. I mean, Simonenko, if I remember correctly, his name, the guy who was in charge, 22-year-old, 23-year-old leader of this unit, he made them swear, his troops, he made swear that they were not going to kill any Jew using bullets. Bullets are too precious.
This is all well described in Jeffrey Weidlinger's new book, In the Midst of Civilized Europe, which goes through the pogroms of 1919.
I really should read it. I did not read that book because I'm a little bit upset at him, because when he was presenting in New York, I think in 2016, there was this conference, Forgotten Genocide, and they started 1918 to 1922. And when I started investigating that genocide, forgotten genocide, it took me down to 1914. It was not genocide during the Civil War that was the beginning of genocide. It was genocide on July 30th of 1914, a day before actual declaration of war, when Tsarist Russian troops started to kill their own Russian Jews across entire front line. More than 1 million were turned into refugees. About 40 to 50,000 Jews were murdered in 1914, 1915 by Russian troops.
Yes, in Galicia as well, when they occupied Galicia.
In Galicia, once they came there, there's a special thing in Galicia. I mean, there were Polish troops who were killing, not too much. I mean, just few hundred Jews they killed. But Russian troops, when they came in, they were murdering, raping, robbing, women in front of their husbands were murdered. I mean, just horrible. And that's why I'm upset at this Engel, or whatever it is, his name.
Weidlinger.
Yeah. Because when I wrote to him, he just responded, well, this is nothing. For him, 1918 was the starting point. But then, of course, what happened after February 15th was Trotsky, who was building the army, the Red Army, instantly came from Kharkov to Kiev in order to get those Jews that just were astonished by that Proskurov pogrom. Proskurov, the city which is now called Khmelnytsky. Thank God that they put in Khmelnytsky now, after Soviet Union collapse, a monument about that pogrom. 1,800 men, women, and children were slaughtered with knives. And of course, and then after the fact, during the Civil War, Jews understood that there was, Ukrainians were no help. I'm talking about Ukrainian nationalists. I do not mean Ukrainians as all ethnic group, but Ukrainian nationalists. Russian Denikin troops were even worse in some ways, although they did not kill as many as Ukrainians, but they were more dead set on killing Jews. I mean, it blows my mind to have a department, a propaganda department, and with 2,000 people, Denikin, I'm talking about, Russian, white Russian troops. And to come up, 2,000 people were able to come up only with one thing for propaganda purposes. Бей жидов, спасай Россию. Kill Jews, save Russia. That's it. So where would, if you were a Jew in there, who would you go with?
Yeah. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Identify the Jews with the Bolsheviks, kill them,
Yeah.
they'll become Bolsheviks.
Yeah, and they did become, and Jews played very, very important role in Red Army during the Civil War. I mean, there were Ukrainians on this side and this side, but Jews constituted maybe like 3% of the troops, but they were the most dedicated troops in every unit. This is the only people that actually Bolshevik army could rely on. I mean, some were, like for example, the idea of redistribution of Polish estates among Ukrainian farmers was attractive to many Ukrainian farmers. So many of them went with Bolsheviks, but they could go this way and this way, because the Petlura also was a socialist, and he probably would have distributed the same land.
If you read Sholokov's Quiet Flows the Don, you can see them switching sides all the time, and that comes out from all the research. And sometimes people join the revolution in order to attack a neighboring village because they have a dispute about where the meadow ends, that kind of thing. So it was it's a mistake to start things in 1917 or 1918. All those processes were set in motion in 1914. I agree with you 100%. And if you want to understand the period, we have to look at the war.
Absolutely, and this is what bothered me about his approach to the whole. He started from 1918, and it has to go to war. But in any case, and the very idea that to make peace. I mean, when I looked at what is the motivation of Tsarist army in murdering Jews, I see only one motivation: to find common ground with Poles that were looking for independence from Russia.
I don't quite say that again.
I'm going to repeat. When I was looking at why the general staff of the Russian army wanted to kill Jews, wanted to do something about Jews, I could find only one reason to do it, because the Poles, as far as Russians were concerned, were not reliable for the Russian army. They were part of Russian Empire, but they were not independent Poland, at least Eastern Poland, not which was part of Prussia, but Eastern Poland. And the Russian army wanted some kind of a cooperation with Poles against Germans. And what Poles wanted, especially those Poles that created, this popular democratic party that started anti-Jewish boycott in 1912, and whose many members were studying at St. Petersburg's University. Nice, always students do something. And they were actively cooperating with Russian army. I mean, Pilsudski cooperated with Austrians, but his opponents cooperated with Russians. That is the first Polish fascists.
Party the National Democrats.
Huh?
The National Democrats.
National
Demowski's group.
Yes.
Well, that could be. Listen, I don't know the evidence for that, but I could say that the Cossacks felt they had a right to plunder Jewish property and to rape Jewish women. Um, I even read once a letter from a Russian soldier to his mother, a Cossack, to his mother, saying, "Can you imagine that? They're forbidding us to rape Jewish women."
Well,
You
it's
know, so I think plunder, uh, violence, sex, lust, all that stuff was in that military.
but there was also the very idea. The idea was that we'll find, because the problem for Russians with Poles was that they were Catholics, and to find common ground with Poles, they needed one enemy, and the Demskis party gave Russians the enemy that they could work with. And the chief of general staff, Yanukovych, I think that he was partially maybe of Polish origin. Yanukovych was partially of Polish origin, although he was Russian Orthodox. I think his father became converted to Russian Orthodoxy when he, I do not know exactly what it was, but he was the most active one in terms of sending out orders for deportation of Jews. I mean, deportations, I mean, talking about 200,000 on May 5th, 200,000 in one day, deporting, and I saw some estimate like 1.1 million deported, and a third of them died in the process from disease and hunger.
But I think you pushed the boundaries back to 1914, where I agree, but you might go back to 1905, the revolution of 1905. That polarized Russian society. Bishops like Antony Khrapovitsky just had such virulent anti-Semitic sermons and pastoral letters, just terrible stuff. That's when the Black Hundreds, the Russian nationalists, became very popular because the society was polarized, much like our society in North America
John
is
Paul,
fairly
I
polarized.
agree with you 100% that the whole thing did not begin in 1914 in terms of psychology. I mean, look at this. In 1903, I mean, the thing is,
Big pogrom in Kishinev.
in Kishinev, it's just the beginning, and then there's different propaganda things, and but 1905, I agree with you 100%, was really a major turning point, and especially because Russian army, a greatest army of in Europe, lost the war to these yellow Japanese guys, and how could we lose the war to these nincompoop Japanese? They're just Asians. They're not Europeans like we are. And then they found the solution. The Jews financed their rebuilding. The Jews financed their fleet, and the Russian officers, and Jews did finance Japanese. England provided much of the technical support and ships to Japanese, but Jews, the German Jew, what's his name? My memory is going bad. Who was affected by two things. One is the fact that it's possibly a good thing to lend money, and make some interest on it. But another that shifted him in that direction, shifted him. shift. Uh, um, uh, it was Kishinev pogrom, and he created, if I remember correctly, a syndicated loan from different banks of $200 million that allowed Japanese to buy the ships from England.
Hmm.
So, in a sense, those Russian officers that were just burning, with the shame for being losers, you know, and that is an interesting thing, by the way, too. When you look at what was there in the Far East, in Russian Far East, before the war, you see that 30% of all Russian forces at the beginning of war between Russia and Japan were Jews. I could not believe it. 30%. Well, out of 100,000, 30,000, more than 30,000 were Jews.
Hmm.
Then Russia, when the action began, Russia expanded the number of people, there, so the number became very small. And also, interesting, I took a look at the statistics of captured by Japanese of Russian troops, and it ends up that the Russian troops were seven times more likely to give up, to throw their weapons down and be captured by Japanese than Jews. 7 times, 700%. But nonetheless, it was Jews that caused Russia to lose, which is fine. And that was 1905. That was the main thing. They were calling, that war in Russia not Японской, that is Japanese, but Żydowской, that is the War of Kikes. And 9 years later, when the First World War began, those officers that were burning with shame for their loss because of Jews to Japanese started murdering Jews, according to Simon Dubnov, all across entire front line. Murdering, robbing, in any case. But let's get back to this thing about Vinnitsa Tragedy and the reaction. On the Wikipedia, I saw about Vinnitsa Tragedy that there's, in 1951, I think, one of the Ukrainian youth organizations, produced a book, and on Wikipedia, I should probably put it here somewhere. They have this portrait of a Red Army guy with a gun. Underneath, in Russian, I do not know why in Russian, maybe it's because Germans produced that poster, but it was in Russian, not in Ukrainian, not Vinnitsa, but Vinnitsa.
Yes, I know, that's a famous poster, and he's got a gun, he's pointing it right at you like this.
Yeah, he is unmistakably Jewish.
Yes, Dad. Yes, there's a cartoon tradition of how to depict Jews. And here where I live in Edmonton, the Edmonton Journal in the last couple of years did one of those, and very controversial how anti-Semitic that cartoon was.
Well, and
so, yes, I know that poster very well.
But for me, it's interesting. Why would Ukrainian organization of young people use the Nazi-produced poster for Vinnitsa Tragedy? I guess they bought the line that Nazis said, this is Jews killing Ukrainians there.
Well, it could be. I haven't seen that particular thing, so I know the poster well. But I have to say that in Ukraine itself, there are some very sensitive and intelligent studies now of what happened in Vinnitsa.
Really?
Oh yeah,
I saw some of them, but they're mostly like statistics and from document studies. But what is of interest to me is, first of all, is I'd like to talk to that uh, priest that I spoke to before, and I did not know much, so I could not actually argue with him the way I could now. But as you know, there's a common grave for those murdered in 1937-38 that they created right next to a branch of Ukrainian church on the city cemetery. And over that grave, there's only cross, meaning the Ukrainians or Christians lie murdered here.
that's in the Orthodox cemetery.
No, no, Orthodox cemetery is next to Pirogov Hospital. But I'm talking about the memorial is on the main city cemetery, not far away from Fruit Garden, where another number of graves discovered. But they were taken from those graves and moved to the main city cemetery. And now there's a big, I mean, the Nazis put in 1943 on top of those graves big crosses, precisely in order to say this is Christians murdered by Jews. And the same thing, great cross, big cross, standing in that place, which now serves as the common grave for all those bodies that were brought there. Of course, probably not all of them were brought there, but just, as a memorial, which is fine. But the fact is that there's only a cross.
Yeah, well, I'm not an ethicist, but this crosses, Stars of David, had been disputed, of course, at Auschwitz, right, and at Babin Yar. At Babin Yar, many feel it's very wrong to have a cross there because it was the major site of a major site of the Holocaust. And others say, but there are Christians buried here too. So, all these things are disputed. And as we try to work out this terrible memory of all the crimes that were committed in this region. And I even have a little article I've been working on for years, but I've and it's about how difficult it is sometimes to decide when you find a mass grave in Ukraine now, whether it was a grave of Jews killed by the Nazis or whether it was a grave of just Soviet citizens of different nationalities killed by the NKVD. So and there are many dicey cases where I think that the investigators are saying, well, these were killed by the NKVD, and I think that in fact they were probably really killed by either the nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists, or the Germans in some of these sites. So, this has left us with a pretty complex and pretty painful memory for a lot of people. And, some people feel like even Ukrainian nationalists who actually took part in all this stuff, old ones, say their story. Why is everybody worried about the Jews, they say? What about us? What about what we had to suffer, our years in prison and exile, our tortures and stuff? it just created things that we're still trying to not only work out, but don't even understand. So it's not unusual to me that we have
John
these.
Paul, I have to say, for me, this particular thing is of importance in part as memory of Jews there. But we'll have that memory in books, and like most of Jewish memory is going to be preserved in books and it's going to be transmitted in it. But in my mind, it's even more important that memory not for Jews, but for Ukrainians. Because unless they remember, they cannot create a country, a society that can survive. Take
I
a
agree. I agree.
take a look at what's happening now. I mean, the whole thing started with Russians. I mean, they would have gone berserk anyway, because Russians do not feel that Ukrainians should rule over them, and should govern them. But when Ukrainians produced that first law about language, that took set Russians off in eastern Ukraine. At least gave many of their agitators something that they could rally other people. And then step by step, it gave justification for Putin to come in and kill hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians.
Well, I think it's tens of thousands at the moment.
Well, tens of thousands civilians. But if you include also soldiers, troops that were murdered on the front and maybe died afterwards, we're talking about at least 150,000. I mean, maybe Ukrainians maybe 100,000 and Russians 200,000. Because Russians in the beginning were dying much more than Ukrainians, at least it seems to me. But Ukrainian troops, at least 100,000. Plus maybe 30,000 civilians. But the war is not over yet, although I understand that Putin now is satisfied with 20% of Ukraine. But we'll see where it's going to go. But the thing is, for Ukraine, the future question still. There's Orthodox Ukrainians, there's Greco Catholic Ukrainians, there's Polish Ukrainians, Jews almost none there, although there's still maybe 40,000, maybe 100,000 people who are considered Jewish by various definitions. I mean, Ukraine is going to be, he has a problem, because the differences in religion, unlike in Poland, where it's one religion, basically. In Ukraine, there's a variety of religions. What is it? The Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, Greco-Catholic, Polish Catholic. So it's already four. There's also, if they're going to get back Crimea one day, maybe not, then there's Muslims, Tatars. But whatever I'm saying is that right now, the way I see it, that to unite those religions for Ukraine as one community, Ukrainian nation, is not easy. Not easy at all. There's problems right now with Russian Orthodox and Ukrainian Orthodox and Greco-Catholics, but it needs to be. And Ukrainians, what I see, Ukrainians are moving toward the defining strictly by ethnic, by blood consideration. And if that is the case, Ukraine may have more problems.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alexander, that this is a problem, the growing ethno-nationalism in Ukraine. I just want to clarify the religious situation a little bit. There's a Ukrainian Orthodox Church that was under the Moscow Patriarchate, but broke all relations with it in May of 2022. So there is no Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine today.
Did they join with the Autokefal church?
No, no. The Patriarch of Constantinople and the American State Department and the President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, are the main forces that created a new Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It's called the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. It's a small church, it's a nationalist church, but it's supposed to unite everybody, but it doesn't. In fact, there's persecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that was formerly associated with the Patriarch of Moscow. So, there's religious persecution, but it's basically ethnically driven. The nationalists who have quite a bit of influence in the security forces, and I think have the president's ear very often. And I can understand why that would be the case, but I don't approve it. They are persecuting the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So there's religious conflict in Ukraine. The Parliament of Ukraine, the Verkhovna Rada, has a bill before it now that is aimed at banning the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, even though it is the largest single confession in Ukraine. So yeah, I agree. There are problems.
Let's see how far they're going to be able to go with it.
Pardon me?
I said, I want to see how far they'll be able to go with this banning.
Well, they could do it.
They could do it, but they would not succeed. I was thinking that maybe they will find a way to unite Ukrainian and formerly Russian Orthodox Church, but to ban a church, I mean, oh my God.
Yes, it's unfortunate, but this is sometimes countries go a little crazy, and war does not bring out the best by any means.
But what that poster that is on
yes, I know the poster
on Wikipedia tells me is that many Ukrainian patriots, nationalists, I do not want to call nationalists, just patriots, they are for Ukraine, they continue to blame Jews for the murder of other Ukrainians. And it's not only in 37, 38. They also blame Jews for 32, 33 Holodomor.
Yeah, I wrote an article about that.
Yeah, and to me, and also the fact is, if you take open Ukrainian books today, I mean, it's like Russian. There's no Jews present there. I'm talking about Ukrainian textbooks in schools. There's no Jews there. Never was. I mean, and in my mind, as I said, as long as we live, there's going to be books, and there's going to be memory, and nothing anybody can do about it. But it affects also the country, or and their idea of what they are and what they should be, because once they start lying to themselves, nothing good can come out of it.
I agree. Ukraine was once, what is today Ukraine was over history very multinational.
Very much so.
The whole South was Tatar. Poles were deep into Ukraine, thickly settled. Jews followed the Poles into Ukraine. There were some there even before, and Germans came as colonists. You know that in Lviv, on Sundays back in like the 17th century, there would be two sermons. One pulpit would be in Polish, and the Poles would go there, and then the other pulpit would be in German because there were so many Germans in the city. It was World War II did a lot to clean this out. And of course, the kind of terrible regimes which Ukraine has had to live under, the Soviet regime and the Nazi regime, both of which were very deeply involved in ethnic cleansing, to try to create a Ukraine for Ukrainians. They've succeeded, but where they haven't succeeded and where their efforts were not totally completed, in the mind of too many Ukrainians, they project back a Ukrainian existence that was of a single ethnicity and of a single kind of religion.
They can imagine whatever they want.
Yes, but there's the dangers with these imaginations.
This is a big danger, a big danger. In any case, I hope that things that Ukrainians are going to find a way to think of Ukraine in a way that they could really be proud of. Not only the sword, but also something. What bothers me a lot is that sometimes we need to make out of horrible things that we do something good. One of them is the fact that Ukraine acquiesced to America and Russia, forcing it to give up nuclear weapons. I mean, I'm against nuclear weapons. I'm sorry, completely. But if Ukraine would have nuclear weapons now, Russia would not be threatening to use them.
Yes.
Uh,
But on the other hand, I'm also against nuclear weapons. And the other thing I think of, I'm not an expert on this issue by any means. It's way beyond my capacities. But it seems to me that fledgling Ukrainian state going through the 1990s, which was a terrible period economically for everybody over there, I don't know if they would have really been able to maintain such an expensive thing as nuclear arms.
I agree with it. I'm not saying that they should have. What I'm saying is this. That
they should have guarantees, though.
That's number one. And number two, as long as you made something like this, make something important, something good out of this thing. And what I mean by this, you are the first country, the first big country in the world that voluntarily gave up nuclear weapons. Make yourself into example for all other countries to follow. But Ukraine does not do it, did not do it. I mean, when I understand that with Zelensky going to Japan, where he could have made really a major point on this one, United States dropping on Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombs, where he could say, look at this, I'm in Japan, but I guess he was afraid to lose the support of the United States, which is vital now for Ukraine. But in my mind, this could have been a big, big thing for Ukraine. And if I would be a president of Ukraine, I would be making this as a central point for Ukraine as a country and as a society. And I would use it against Putin, I would use it against anybody, because the future of Ukraine, in my mind, is not going to be protected by NATO. It's going to be an independent country, and that country that has to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. And in order to stand on its own 2 feet, it has to have some unifying morality, some unifying idea of what it's all about. And to make out of country which the foundation of which is Cossacks, people that like to use swords and things like that, to make it into a country that is willing to and is capable of leading toward world peace, I think, in my mind, would be a good thing. But who am I? In any case, Jean Paul, thank you very much for this wonderful conversation that at least I feel wonderful that we had. And thank you for your opinion and your position.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Alexander. I appreciate it.
Thank you. In my mind, in my book, you're one of the most decent people in the world, and I'm not exaggerating. Maybe other people that listen to us now do not even understand what I'm saying, but maybe one day they will understand. Anyway, have a great day and the very best, and hope to talk
Okay,
to you
you
again.
too.
Thank you.
And to your listeners, a good day.